Hey everyone, factoring into today's video, we're going to have a look at the Japanese model today for the next 3 months. So this takes us through the autumn. It goes from September through to November. This will make up part of the autumn forecast that we're going to do in a couple of weeks. The last Sunday of August, we'll do the autumn forecast and we'll see the JMA model as part of that. But there's so much information you can get from this model that I don't have time when I do the autumn forecast to sort of look at everything that you can with the JMA. So we'll have a look at all the detail on what the Japanese model is showing for the next 3 months in a moment. And then we'll also have a look at the weather for the next 8 to 10 days. It looks like we could be turning a little bit thundery at the weekend down in the south. But before we get on with that, just very quick to say about the assets, links to articles on all the pages that goes on the Scump Browse widgets, any articles that you're interested in, please click through your article for read the article. Thanks so much for doing that. There's also video ads for those pages that open out within the content. And then when you watch them, they'll close back up again. Thanks so much for getting involved. And thanks for doing that. I've got a bit of a cough, so hope you bear with me if I have to have a little bit of a cough. Right, we've got the JMA 500mm height anomalies from the Northern Hemisphere view first of all, and then we'll have a look at the temperature and precipitation that go with these from sort of the mid-latitude view. So we start off with September. This is the 500mm height anomaly for September. From the North Pole, looking down at the North Pole. And just to say that the UK is just there. So what we see for September is that we've got a bit of a battle going on, actually. It's signalling fairly above average height, sitting to the east and the northeast of the country. Big area of high pressure there. But a trough of low pressure is in the central part of the Atlantic. So the jet stream and the flow is going rather like that. So it's sort of a battleground UK month in September. That low pressure is fairly close to us and would no doubt be throwing up some rain bands. But to the east, we do have this ridging. Could be a transitional month maybe. So we start off with quite a lot of ridging in the first part of it, and then it gradually deteriorates and turns more unsettled. But overall, it's perhaps a little bit more of an unsettled September than we've had certainly last year. Last year was very settled September. I think it's something like the driest since 1959 or something ridiculous like that last year. So it looks a more unsettled September, albeit with quite a lot of ridging to the east, providing us with some settled conditions at times. So have a look at the temperature and precipitation anomalies that go with these charts in a moment. For October, we find that the trough becomes more influential. So this ridge is being forced back in towards, well, it's going back towards western parts of Russia, actually. And this trough in the Atlantic is now becoming quite deep, quite influential, with the jet stream running through the country like that. So that is an unsettled month in October. Would be quite a wet month potentially. Could also be rather windy as well, because the trough is deepening in the Atlantic, becoming quite powerful actually. So maybe even some windstorms couldn't be ruled out on that. So quite an unsettled, quite a seasonable, if you like, sort of October, with a fair amount of wet and windy weather coming through. And then things just go downhill further as we go through into November. So this looks like a very unsettled November being signalled here. A really wet month is likely. Deep area of below average heights right around the UK. And the jet stream is going something like that. Also, that trough is a little bit south of its mean position. We will have a look at the temperature anomaly that goes with this, but I wouldn't be surprised if we do entrench some colder air actually into that trough at times. So on that sort of scenario, because the high pressure around the Azores and to the south of the country is generally quite weak and going further south than its mean position, I wouldn't be that surprised if we was to entrench some cold air into that low pressure at times through November, and possibly give us a few early little blasts of winter type conditions. So it looks like being a fairly cool and changeable autumn actually on these anomalies, and possibly by the time we get through to November, possibly even very wet, and maybe bringing through some wintry potential. Right, let's have a look at see how the temperatures stack up with this and the precipitation over the next 3 months. So again, we start off with September. This is the mid-latitude view now, and the British Isles is just here in the very top right-hand corner of the chart. As you're looking at it, it's almost hard to make this out, but that's where we are. And Europe, central part of Europe, is over here on the top left-hand side of the chart as you're looking at it. So what we see for September, of course, we know we've got the trough of low pressure in the Atlantic. We have got some ridging out to the east of us. So it's sort of a battleground UK situation for September. Maybe transitional with high pressure, fairly dominant early on, and then going down here. Or it could be the other way around, of course, with low pressure early on and then sort of going towards high pressure. It's difficult to say which way round it would be, but probably more likely to be high pressure to start off with and then turning more unsettled later on. The temperature anomaly for September is coming out cooler than average. That's quite a change on what we tend to get for September. It tends to be quite a warm month, particularly in the last few years. So a cooler than average September being signalled there. The wind flow, not sure if you can quite make these arrows out, but the wind flow is generally coming from a southwesterly type direction. So it does imply that trough is maybe a little bit more powerful than the ridge, actually, driving the air in off the Atlantic. Because we know we've got a deep pool of cold air, cold water I should say, sitting just to the west of us in the Atlantic Ocean. So any air that's coming off the Atlantic is likely to be modified, and the temperature will be lowered a little bit while we've got that deep cold pool sitting in the Atlantic Ocean. And the rainfall anomaly for September, it does really show us that that battleground situation, because to the west and the north, the rainfall anomaly is a little bit above average, whereas to the east, you probably can't make it out that well, but to the east, actually the rainfall anomaly is a little bit drier than average. So an east-west split for September, the west getting the wettest weather, the east getting the driest conditions. Now, as we go through to October, as we know, the ridge is being pushed back in towards west of Russia, with the low pressure in the Atlantic becoming more influential. It's becoming deeper. It's sending the jet stream right through the country. So you would expect a more unsettled month, a wetter month in October. The temperature anomaly is still coming out cooler than average. I'm sure this is really because the air is being driven in off the Atlantic, and the Atlantic is probably about the coldest, or the North Atlantic, anyway, probably about the coldest that it's been maybe since the early 1990s, maybe even going back to the 1980s. It really is in a very cold state at the moment, the Northern Atlantic Ocean. So, as I say, with the air driving in off the North Atlantic, it will lower the temperatures compared to what you would expect with a normal westerly flow. So, cooler than average October being signalled. Again, with the wind arrows, probably can't make it out that well, but wind arrows are signalling that we're driving the air in off the Atlantic, so coming from a west-southwesterly type direction, which would normally be fairly mild in October, but the temperature normally being dragged down by the cold pool sitting in the Atlantic Ocean. And the rainfall anomaly is coming out a little bit wetter than average. Actually, it's wetter in the south and a little bit drier in the north. But overall, I think that is a pretty unsettled, pretty wet month being signalled for October. And then finally we go through to November, and this is when we've got that deep trough really dominating the weather in November. It's gone very unsettled by this point, possibly entrenching colder air in from a northwesterly direction into that trough as well. The temperature anomaly, it's 3 out of 3 for cooler than average. That's going to be a very cool end to the year if this is right, with November coming out cooler than average as well. Almost certainly, again, a big influence from the cold pool in the Atlantic Ocean. The wind arrows, again, probably can't make this out very well, but wind arrows are coming from a more northwesterly point. So, as I was saying, I think we could have the potential for entrenching colder air into that trough by the time we get through to November. Maybe even giving us, particularly in the north, but perhaps even down in the south, giving us some early wintry type conditions. You can get snow in November. And the rainfall anomaly is wetter than average. It looks like being a pretty dismal month, actually, if this is right. Proper wet and cool, or even at times perhaps even cold conditions for November. So it's a mixed bag, but overall a very changeable autumn being signalled here by the JMA model. And yes, I think by the time you get through to November, certainly we do have a little bit of wintry potential creeping in as well. And September's interesting because that looks a little bit more unsettled, certainly compared to last year, and maybe compared to quite a few recent years. So all in all, quite an interesting autumn being signalled here. We will do the autumn forecast, the full autumn forecast from gasbubblies.com on the final Sunday of August. I think it'll be something like the 29th or 30th of the month. So we'll do the autumn forecast then. The JMA will make up part of that autumn forecast. But as I say, because there's so much information you can get from a JMA model, I won't have time to touch on everything that you get from this model in that update. Finally, just have a look at the weather for the weekend and the start of next week. We've got an interesting situation developing perhaps for the weekend, because low pressure could be starting to push up from the south. So this is for GFS this is for GFS 500 millibar chart for Sunday, and we've got low pressure here moving out of the south and pushing northwards, and it develops into quite a thundery low there across northern parts of France by the time we get through to Monday next week. That could bring the risk of some heavy rain and thunderstorms from the south over the weekend inside of next week. This is a rainfall forecast for 6 o'clock in the morning on Sunday. Lots of heavy rain and storms down to the south, and they push up into the UK as we go through Sunday itself. So quite a lot of rain there next Sunday. Some of that could well be thundery. Beyond that, it looks like the start of next week we'll find that low pressure slipping away into the continent, and then we probably build some sort of a ridge back in from the Atlantic. Not sure how long that lasts, because the next low pressure is starting to push in by day 10. That's the GFS, this is the ECM WF, and again, same idea, but we're pulling up this air from the south over the weekend, possibly with some sort of a thundery low developing around the country. Actually, the ECM places that low pressure off the southwest of the country, but obviously the detail on that is to be determined. There is another little low pressure around East Anglia as well. The overall signal is that as we go through the weekend and start of next week, we could push some thundery stuff up from the south. As we go through next week, the ECMWF is in a bit of a mess, but it looks like it basically ends up with low pressure out to the west of the country and a ridge trying to hang on to the east, but a pretty changeable spell coming up next week if the ECMWF is right. So we're going to watch out some thunderstorms as we go through into the weekend, I think particularly later in the weekend, and possibly through to the start of next week. And then next week probably turns more unsettled. I think we're going to have a fair amount of dry weather this week, but next week could be a more unsettled week. And then in terms of what the JMA is showing, pretty mixed autumn to say the least, particularly October and November looking very unsettled, and certainly quite cool as well. The Atlantic's in a cold state, so with the air driving in off the Atlantic, a fairly chilly autumn is possible. I haven't had a really cold autumn since 1993. That's the last time we had a significantly cold autumn. Maybe this will be the year where we get a colder autumn. We'll have to wait and see. And so we'll do the autumn forecast at the end of the month. That's it for now, and thanks for watching.